3 civilizations, 3 different continents. No contact with each other, it's like historians are certain of that. And yet all 3 of them drew the same creature. Same height, same proportions, same detail that I'm going to tell you about at the end of this video. Because when I first read it, I had to put my laptop down and walk outside. What you're about to hear isn't a ghost story, it's something older than that. Something that might be far more difficult to explain away. The creature has no single name because it was discovered separately and named separately by people who never spoke to each other. In ancient Greece, it appeared in texts dating back to roughly 700 BCE. The Greeks called it a lamia, a being that looked almost human. Almost. But they wrote specific warnings about it, things that had to be memorized before traveling at night. In feudal Japan, around the same era, the Nupeppo was described in texts that would become part of the Hyakumonogatari Kaidankai tradition. The ancient ritual of telling 100 ghost stories in a single night. Priests were required to memorize descriptions of it, and in pre-Columbian Mexico, among the Aztec, a creature matching the same description appeared in codices, the illustrated manuscripts that recorded their history, their gods, and their warnings. 3 independent civilizations. 3 priests or scholars required to memorize the same description. And no trade route, no ocean crossing, no shared language between them. So either this is an extraordinary coincidence, or something real was being described. In 2019, a comparative mythology researcher at the University of Edinburgh named Dr. Sharon Blackwood published a paper that almost nobody read. It was academic, dense. But buried on page 34 was a table that stopped her colleagues cold. She had cross-referenced the physical descriptions from all 3 cultures, and she found not 2, not 3, but 7 matching attributes. I'm going to give you 6 of them now. I'm holding the 7th one back until we get to the part of the story that made Dr. Blackwood request a leave of absence from the university. Attribute 1, height. All 3 cultures described it as being between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. Attribute 2, movement. All 3 described it as moving in a way that looked almost right. Not limping, not running, just slightly off. Like watching a video of a person walking, slowed down by 5%. Attribute 3, it was always found near water, not in water, near it. Rivers, wells, coastlines. Attribute 4, it was only ever encountered at dusk or pre-dawn. Never full night, never full day. Attribute 5, it did not speak. But witnesses described a sound. And in all 3 cultures, the word used translated roughly to a sound like breathing through wet cloth. Attribute 6, and this is the one that keeps folklorists up at night. It was always encountered alone. Never more than one. But more than one culture added the same footnote. Witnesses who survived the encounter reported hearing what sounded like distant crying after it left. Not from it. From somewhere else. Now, I want to pause here, because at this point in the research, there's a direction this story could go that would be reassuring. We could talk about Jungian archetypes. Carl Jung's theory that certain images exist in humanity's collective unconscious. Shared fears that emerge independently because we are all fundamentally the same species with the same anxieties. That's a completely valid explanation. Many scholars land there. Dr. Blackwood landed there too. Initially. But then she found the 7th attribute. And she also found something that Jung's theory cannot explain. A physical object, currently held in a university archive, that shouldn't exist. Let me give you the full mythology from each culture because the context matters. In ancient Greece, the Lamia wasn't simply a monster. She was originally a queen, a mortal woman, or in some versions a minor deity, who suffered a catastrophic loss. Different versions of the myth differ on what she lost, but they agree on what she became afterward. Something that could not grieve. Something that had stopped being human, not through violence or magic, but through a kind of emotional rupture so extreme that the body itself changed. The Greeks were specific. This wasn't transformation. This was what grief looks like when it has nowhere to go, when it has no ritual, no community, no language to process it. It simply accumulates, and eventually the person it's living inside becomes something else. The warnings that priests memorized weren't, "Here's how to fight it." They were, Here is how to recognize someone before they become it. The Aztec version of this story contains a detail that was only fully translated into English in 2003. For decades, the relevant passage in the codex was described in academic literature as a warning about solitary travel. Standard translation. But in 2003, a scholar named Dr. Marcus Reyes, who specialized in Nahuatl, the Aztec language, published a new translation. And the passage didn't say warning about solitary travel. It said, "Do not look at it for longer than you would look at the sun. And if you hear crying nearby, the crying is not nearby." Read that again. The crying is not nearby. The Aztecs weren't saying there was crying in the distance. They were saying that the sound of crying, which seems close, seems like it's right next to you, is coming from somewhere else. Something else. 300 years later, in a Japanese account from the Edo period, a monk wrote almost the same thing. "The weeping you hear is not from the thing in front of you. Look behind you." This is where Dr. Blackwood's story gets strange in a different way. While compiling her comparative research, she requested access to physical artifacts associated with each cultural tradition. Standard academic practice, you want to see the primary sources, not just translations. From Greece, fragments of pottery depicting the Lamia held in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. She examined them. Normal. From Mexico, pages from a codex held in the Biblioteca Nacional de Antropología e Historia in Mexico City. She examined them. Normal. From Japan, she requested access to a collection of Edo period illustrated scrolls held at Kyoto University. And here is where the story shifts. The curator at Kyoto University told her that one of the scrolls in the collection, a scroll specifically depicting the Nopepo, had been placed in restricted access in 1987. Not because it was fragile, not because of its historical value, because of what happened to the previous 3 researchers who had examined it closely. All 3 had submitted formal requests to change their research focus within 6 months of viewing the scroll. 2 had left academia entirely. The third, a folklorist named Dr. Tanaka, had continued her research but had, in the curator's words, developed an unusual preoccupation with the sound of crying. Dr. Blackwood requested access anyway. The university said no. She was denied access to the scroll, but she was given access to the academic notes that the previous researchers had left behind. And those notes contained the 7th attribute. I told you I was saving it. The 7th attribute that all 3 cultures agreed on, that Dr. Blackwood found independently documented in Greece, Mexico, and Japan, had nothing to do with what the creature looked like. It had nothing to do with where it appeared. It was about what happened to people after they saw it. In all 3 cultures, there was a documented experience that witnesses described in the aftermath of an encounter. Not trauma, not fear. A sound. Specifically, witnesses reported that for a period of weeks or months after the encounter, they would intermittently hear crying. Not at night, not in any particular context. Just present, in quiet moments, in the background. And crucially, they always described it as sounding like it was coming from just outside wherever they were. Outside the window, around the corner of a building, just out of sight. The Greeks called this the echo of the Lamia. They had a ritual to address it, a specific prayer that was supposed to help it fade. The Aztec Codex described the sound in the passage we already covered. The crying is not nearby. The Japanese scroll, the one Dr. Blackwood was denied access to, apparently depicted this aftermath in detail. One of the denied researchers had described it in her notes as follows. The illustrations in the final section of the scroll show an ordinary domestic scene. A family eating a meal. But in each illustration, one figure has their head slightly turned toward a window. In each illustration, the figure is different. By the final illustration, every figure at the table has their head turned toward the window, and the window is dark. Here's the part I want you to sit with. These weren't cultures describing a monster that ate people. They weren't describing a creature that killed. They were describing something that left people listening, for something that wasn't there, or that was always just outside. Dr. Blackwood's paper was published in 2019. It received modest attention in academic circles. She submitted a follow-up paper in 2021 that would have compiled her complete findings, including her theory about what evolutionary or cultural mechanism could produce identical mythology across 3 disconnected civilizations. The paper was never published, not because it was rejected, because she withdrew it. In the withdrawal letter to the journal, she wrote a single sentence of explanation. "I no longer believe the correct framework for understanding this material is mythological. I want to give you 2 frameworks here because I think you deserve both. The first is the rational one, and I believe it completely. Carl Jung proposed that humans share what he called a collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche that contains universal symbols and fears that have nothing to do with learned experience, the shadow, the trickster, the monster at the threshold. If you accept Jung's framework, the shared description of this creature is not mysterious at all. It's simply evidence that grief, isolation, and the uncanny activate the same symbolic architecture in all human brains, regardless of culture. The creature is the personification of unprocessed loss. The crying is the sound of the self before the rupture. Different cultures, same species, same fear." That's a beautiful and completely satisfying answer. Here is the second framework. What if the creatures these cultures documented weren't metaphors? What if they were observations? What if 3 separate human populations, separated by thousands of miles of ocean and mountain, each encountered something that behaved in the ways described, and each independently built mythology around it to explain what they'd seen and to warn their communities? That's not an answer. That's a much bigger question. And Dr. Blackwood in the withdrawal letter seems to have arrived somewhere in the vicinity of that bigger question. She has not published since 2021. She does still maintain an academic email address. She doesn't respond to it. I've thought about this story a lot since I first found the research. What strikes me most isn't the creature, it's the aftermath. 3 different civilizations, people who built entirely different gods, different afterlives, different cosmologies, all agreed that the most important thing to document wasn't the encounter itself. It was what you heard afterward. And all 3 of them described it the same way. Crying. Just outside. There's a thread in what I do on this channel. This idea that the scariest things aren't the ones that are trying to get you. They're the ones that have already changed something about how you hear the world. The lamia, the napepo, the creature with no name in the Aztec Codex. Maybe Jung was right. Maybe these are reflections of the same deep human fear. The fear that grief, if left alone long enough, doesn't heal. It just gets quieter. And then one day it starts making noise again from somewhere just outside. Or maybe 3 different groups of people spread across the ancient world were all trying to warn each other about the same thing, and the warning traveled too slowly to reach us. If that one got to you, I have another one that might affect you differently. There's a mythology from Southeast Asia, one of the ones we've covered on this channel, where the creature isn't outside the window. It's already been inside the house. And the family doesn't know until they count the people at the table. If you know which one I'm talking about, it's already in your recommendations.